Welcome to the PlantFit Summit, bringing you the best in plant-based health and fitness. This is Luke and Toby, and today we have Fraser Bayley. Fraser is the co-founder of the online vegan health and fitness brand called VegUp, formerly known as Evolving Alpha. He's also a longtime vegan nutritionist, peak performance specialist, animal lover, and dad to his little girl, Zia. We start the conversation with Fraser sharing about how social isolation affects our immunity. Enjoy the presentation.
One of the interesting things that I've seen in research, and I've heard from a lot of supporting doctors who have studied immunology and psychology, is how much being in social isolation away from other humans can affect our immune function. I think there is definitely an integral part of our immune system that is contingent on human contact, that is contingent on human interaction. And what I would put forward to people who are listening to this is that improving how your body responds to a virus or stress or recovery from a workout, because you see, your immune system plays a role in all of these things. It plays a role in recovering from a workout. It plays a role in recovering and optimizing from a viral response or a bacterial response or anything like that. But it also helps you mitigate psychological and physiological stress in your life. And so when we look at ways to mitigate stress responses to help improve immune function, it's not just about nutrition. It's not just about food. Like, there's not just one supplement you take to help with this. So it's not just a matter of taking vitamin C. It is much more multifaceted than that, but it's not complicated either. It's actually very simple. And so what I put forward to people is that, yes, one part of it is nutrition. You will optimize the way your body responds immunologically via food choices. But beyond that, getting outside daily in sunlight, getting outside daily in nature, getting outside daily in fresh air that's not just a recirculating AC environment, these things really play a role in how our body handles stress and viral loads and all those types of things. And then obviously segueing back into the interaction, there is definitely correlation, there's definitely interest in how, for example, elderly people, the more social interaction they have and the more relationships that they have in their life, physical relationships, their longevity increases. And so when you see people who don't have an abundance of friendships and meaningful human connection and interaction, it massively affects longevity. And that really paints a picture in terms of, it's not just about plant-based nutrition. It's not just about working out. It's much more than that. But again, it's simple in nature as well. Like, it's not these things are not complicated. And so I think for anyone listening who might be in their house a lot or in a work environment a lot where they're not outside, they're not in nature, they're not in these natural bacterial biomes to help repopulate their gut and all these different things, those types of things, getting out in nature as much as you can, getting outside, even if it's just in the city, as much fresh air and sunlight as you can, those things really drive a huge part of how our body handles stress in all these different forms.
Indeed, I 100% agree, because when we look at the blue zones, a lot of these populations are linked with purpose, are linked with community practices as well. And to kind of take all of that away, it is detrimental for mental health and, of course, physical health as well. Before we actually get into gut health and microbiome, maybe we could just kind of take a back step into biofeedback. What is biofeedback?
So think of biofeedback as the chapter titles in a book. It basically is the umbrella term that's used to address the way that the body is trying to communicate with you that something is out of homeostasis, so out of balance, whether it is in a good way or a negative way. And so biofeedback is essentially like a way to measure progress, or a way to measure what is not optimal in your health and in your life. And so what we're looking at when it comes to biofeedback is we're looking at recovery from working out. We're looking at sleep quality. We are looking at digestive function. So bloating, constipation. Do you have regular bowel movements? Is there some dysbiosis there? Do you get bloating when you eat certain foods? All of those things are biofeedback cues. Other things can be like hunger and cravings, brain fog, lethargy, breakouts, acne, pimples, all these types of different skin manifestations that are often a representation of what's happening inside. Even cognitive changes, mental health issues, ADHD, water retention, all these different types of things play into how your body essentially functions. And the reason why this is important is because that often, and especially in Western societies, is that we don't understand the biofeedback signals our body's trying to send us. And so because of that, we mask it with a medication, or we use something to essentially put rocket boosters on it that's not addressing the root cause. And so what I mean by this is, if you wake up and you're feeling incredibly lethargic and dead to the world, and you need 500 milligrams of caffeine every morning to just get up and function, that's definitely addressing the symptom, but it's not understanding what's happening before that with your biofeedback cues that is suboptimal with your sleep patterns, your evening routines, that we need to dial in order to make that thing a non-issue, so you don't need all of that stimulant to get you going each day. And it's the same thing with if you are trying to concentrate and focus, but you find you're just constantly getting brain fog and your energy levels are up and down and up and down. And so you then start getting cravings for sugar, or you need more caffeine through the day. Those things are your body's trying to communicate with you that the nutrition or your lifestyle or something you're doing in your environment, or there's something in your environment or your world or your diet that is not optimal yet. And likewise, if your energy is really good and it's really balanced and your sleep is really optimal and your body composition is changing easily, it tends to be that you're in sync, you're in alignment with those cues. I've noticed, and the reason why this matters for people, because I know a lot of people are focused and concerned with optimizing their body composition. They want to get leaner, they want to build muscle. If you're constantly fighting cravings and you're not sleeping optimally, and your hormone function is affected by poor sleep and too many stimulants and poor diet, because you're fighting all these cues all the time, your body composition is not going to optimize as a byproduct of doing all of these things correctly. And what I find with a lot of people is they work backwards. They try and optimize their body composition and they just force it, not paying attention to all these cues over here. And what happens is they can sometimes force their body to change, but then what happens after that? They go straight back because the cues become so dominant that they can't sustain it. My whole message is that with biofeedback, once you understand the way your body's trying to communicate with you, you can learn that language. You can customize your nutrition, your lifestyle strategies, your training strategies to those cues, so you optimize internally and feel better, but your body composition optimizes as a byproduct of doing all these things. So segueing back into digestion and immune function, there's cues around all of these things. Like if you're getting sick all the time, there's a lot of people I know and they're constantly getting colds. And I've noticed with certain people that when they get put under psychological stress, they get a cold 2 or 3 days later. Psychological stress, cold. Psychological stress, cold. That's telling you that it's a stress response. Your psychology is literally affecting your immune function and your immune strength, and then you're getting susceptible to getting sick. And so there are so many things to unpack with that, but that's a biofeedback cue that's telling you that, hey, you need to start regulating your nervous system response more. If you're getting sick like that, it means that your lifestyle is affecting your nervous system in such a negative way that you're opening that door. And so how can we reverse engineer that? Go back to the start and start putting simple things in place to help recover and prevent those things from happening in the first place as much. So that's kind of like that. Biofeedback is essentially your body trying to communicate with you. We just need to learn its language. It's like learning a different language. Very often we don't even know it's speaking to us. So that's exactly what it is to start with.
Definitely. So in terms of cues there, you mentioned caffeine. What are the common cues that people misinterpret?
I found this to be relevant with people who are new to a plant-based diet. This is very important, where they get hunger and cravings and they think that they are missing some type of special mineral or vitamin or micronutrient from an animal-based food. And so they assume that they weren't getting enough protein, or that they weren't getting enough of, often it's just a guess. Often what it actually is because they've added so many high fiber, lower calorie foods into their diet, which is congruent with a whole food plant-based diet. It typically is higher in volume, lower in calories. They inadvertently cut their total calorie intake way down. So they go from, maybe before they made the change, they were consuming 2,500 calories a day, and they accidentally cut their calorie intake to 1,500. Even though the meals that they're making look large, it's just a lot of fiber. And so what happens is, as you probably know, anyone who's drops their calories very quickly, whether it's for a bodybuilding competition or you're trying to cut weight for a fight or anything, you will feel the negative downstream effect of that in terms of your energy levels. And so often what they think is that they have this lethargy or this low energy, and they think it's a missing micronutrient, when in actuality, it's just a big reduction of calories. And they need to stabilize their calorie intake higher up first to allow their body to acclimate to the diet change before they start trying to play with their calorie intake and get fat loss. And so it's not that they're missing something per se, but it is that they cut their calories too quickly. Another thing that is a really relevant one for a lot of people is that they get these craving signals. And what I often tell people is that genuine hunger, like if you're literally in a caloric deficit and you have genuine hunger, it's typically a ghrelin response, which is a hormone released, and it creates like a growling sensation in your stomach. So have you ever experienced that sensation where your stomach growls? You can literally feel it contracting and moving. That, to me, is more of a sign of genuine hunger. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to just listen to that response and just feed yourself. You can choose to not to do that. But cravings typically are that absence of that growling and that physical feeling in your gut. It tends to emanate from your head, and it's an absence of that feeling. So if you don't have that feeling of growling in your stomach, but you feel hungry, it's typically a craving. And so what people will do is they'll interpret that as they need food. They're like, oh man, I'm craving food. I must be hungry, or I must need some micronutrient. And what happens is that very often we make poorer choices. And I've noticed when people consume more processed foods, more processed sugars, oils, and things like that, it's like this catch-22. They consume more of that, and it actually increases their hunger response more, especially the next day. If you've ever noticed, when you eat something that isn't really that healthy for you, you typically have much higher levels of hunger, cravings the following day. That's a physiological hormonal change. And so people misinterpret that of, I need to eat because I'm low on calories, I'm low on fuel. It's not that they're low on fuel. It's that they've triggered an adverse hormonal response that they need to almost reset by cleaning up their diet again and paying attention to that cue of, is there an absence of this growling sensation in my stomach? Because if there is, it's probably a craving. And cravings can also be habitual. So like just part of like your routine, like if you do the same thing every day all the time, your body literally starts to understand that, and it will start to release insulin as a way to handle that incoming blood sugar as an anticipatory effect. And so there is a habitual pattern there. There are so many different biofeedback cues and concepts, but especially the one I talked about with the feeling of lethargy and tiredness, I think tends to be a steep reduction in calories, or their consuming just not micronutrient dense foods. And so they're consuming a lot of plant-based meat alternatives and vegan novelty foods, but they're not consuming nutrient-rich foods. And so because of that, they're not hitting micronutrients that they need, and their body's not optimizing like it could. And so they're getting these adverse signals, and they're like, oh man, this is not working for me. And it's like, it's not that it's not working for you. It's just that you're not necessarily approaching things with the right strategy to start with. And so that's another really important thing to note for anyone who's new to a plant-based diet.
So speaking of strategies, for example, someone that is wanting to consider going into this lifestyle, but is addicted to certain types of foods and hyperpalatable foods and has lost that connection with what true hunger and what satiation and what the body actually needs. How can they start or begin to recalibrate?
So what I would tell people first, and I find this tends to be a better relationship with food, is that to add foods in to crowd out the old foods. And so what I mean by this is people think to themselves, well, what things do I need to remove from my diet that are sabotaging me? What things do I need to remove from my diet that are causing negative biofeedback responses? And yes, you do want to remove those things at some point, but my whole thing is add good things into your diet as much as possible to, one, crowd out the old things, but to also improve those biofeedback cues that will happen as a result of adding those things in. And so what I would tell people is that hyperpalatable cravings, those types of things, one, it's a learnt system. So your body will crave and have taste for foods that are familiar to it. And I've experienced this firsthand, and I know that you can probably attest to this, that as you give yourself time and consistency and effort with changing your lifestyle and diet, your tastes shift. Your cravings shift. You start to crave whole foods. You start to crave salads and lentils and things that are in whole food form. You don't crave those processed hyperpalatable things as much. But even knowing that, it can still be challenging for people to start with. And that's why adding in lots of different types of fruits between your meals, adding in big green salads, it's what I basically call it low-hanging fruit protocols, where they're relatively easy to implement and they don't take a lot of strategy or effort. So typically it is 2 to 4 servings of fruit per day, whether it's an apple, an orange, a kiwi, a cup of dark berries, between your lunch and dinner meals as sort of a standalone snack. And then for each lunch and dinner meal, whatever that looks like, add in a really big portion of colorful fibrous vegetables, whether it's a mixed salad with some carrots and some red peppers, or it's a stir fry. Whatever you do, add those greens and that fiber in as well. Adding those things in will help control blood glucose response, insulin responses better. You're going to get more micronutrients into your diet alongside whatever you're doing. That's going to help mitigate that sort of hyperpalatable response that is going to keep us stuck in that pattern. The last thing that I'll say is that give yourself bridging tools that you know could help you basically leap through that gap, where I am the first to say, and I know that you are very similar in your approach, where I think that there's a time and place for plant-based meat alternatives and vegan novelty foods. Like if someone has an ethical motivation for this, but they're not interested in the health benefits, that's their decision. And that at least they have those foods for them. Or from an environmental impact perspective, there's these foods that have much less of an environmental impact. But also, I think for a lot of people, if they come from a really heavy animal-based diet, just using plant-based meat alternatives as a bridging tool. And look, if they want to use them long-term, that's on them. I don't personally do that myself anymore, but use it as a bridging tool to help get you through the door. You know, so if you're constantly being pulled back to wanting those things because of the texture and the salt and the taste and all these different things, use those as a way to get yourself over that hurdle first. And then start to add in more whole plant foods, more lentils, more chickpeas, more tempeh, more black beans. All of these things, start to add those things in and then crowd out those things. And then you're on a whole other level of health. And so it's definitely around understanding that your palate and your taste buds will shift and change if you give it enough time, bridging the gap with plant-based alternatives as much as you need to, and then adding things in to crowd out the old foods rather than just removing things and leaving like a big gaping hole in your diet, and then you don't know what to add, and then you go back to what you were doing. So that's definitely some of the strategies that I implore people to take.
Moving into microbiome health as well, with processed foods or meat, plant-based meat alternatives, consuming foods like that, how does that actually affect your microbiome?
So I definitely think that when you're thinking about health and when you're thinking about fat loss and when you're thinking about anything like improving blood work, building muscle, you have to think about that first point of entry. So your gut health will drive a lot of those downstream things that you're looking for, because it's essentially what takes that food and converts it into amino acids and converts it into all these little constituent parts that it uses to build muscle, to regenerate cells, to optimize immune function, to create hormone precursors for hormone production, neurotransmitter production, and all these things. What I tell people is that, simply put, the more processed things, oils, processed foods, foods that come with a label in a package, foods that have advertising for them. You don't see broccoli being advertised on TV. It's always processed cereals and things like that. Those things will typically have adverse effects on your gut biome. It's typically going to increase and proliferate negative bacteria, and that can then create overgrowths and excessive bloating and constipation and all these gut dysbioses that we see. If you're looking for optimal nutrient absorption, reduction of inflammation, reduction of leaky gut, and all of these things, IBS, colitis, diverticulitis, all these things that are inflammatory gut bowel diseases, we need to start being intentional with the type of foods that we're putting in our digestive system. Foods that are whole food in nature, foods that are high in soluble and insoluble fiber. I definitely feel like, and this is a really cool analogy, and I know that people out there might say, well, what is the science behind this? But just think about this for a second. So, and I know that they talked about this in the Game Changers, where they looked at the fat literally circulating in people's blood from eating like animal-based fat in their diet. And you think about that, if you've cooked bacon or some type of animal product in a pan and you put that pan in the sink and you just leave it there, literally a hard layer of grease forms. That layer is solid. And if you cook plant-based foods, stir fries, whole foods, there's nothing there. It's just a little bit of water from the vegetables. It's very clean. And so I often think about that, not just through my circulatory system, but through my digestive system. Do you want a layer of viscous fat coating your digestive system, preventing assimilation of nutrients potentially? And so just that visual, I find, is enough for the average person who doesn't need to understand a lot of science to go like, wow, I can visualize that in my head. That's kind of compelling in terms of like a nutrient absorption and reduction of inflammation in the gut. And so I definitely think, from my perspective, based on a lot of the research of the different plant-based doctors, that a reduction of oils, some of the more pro-inflammatory oils that can be found in plant-based meat alternatives and are found in animal-based foods, meats, dairy, eggs, definitely need to be reduced because you think about it, if you're causing a inflammatory response through your circulatory system from consuming saturated fats, that's creating an inflammatory response through your entire body. It's not just reserved to your circulatory system. It's reserved to everything. Your digestive system takes that. Your brain takes that, everything. And so you need to be conscious of, okay, this is not just impacting my heart health. It's potentially impacting all my systems in my body in different ways, even if you don't necessarily understand it. So I definitely think reducing processed foods, anything that comes in a package, as much as you can, and give yourself time to transfer over to that if you need to, but have that as the goal. Have that as the goal.
You mentioned amino acids as well. I want to dive into that because my understanding is that animal-based proteins, firstly, leucine is the amino acid that triggers muscle protein synthesis, and animal protein is higher in leucine as compared to plant-based. How is the leucine in animal-based protein different to the plant-based sources? Do they trigger more muscle protein synthesis
Yeah.
or less? And what is the impact on long-term health?
Yes, it's a good question. So think of it like this. So any amino acid in the body, whether it's leucine or valine or anything like that, you've got to ask yourself, what is the package deal with that? So you're not just getting leucine. You're not just getting the amino acids. You're getting other things that come along with that package deal. It's like buying a combo meal from a fast food place. You're not just getting the Big Mac. You're getting everything that comes with that as well. You're getting the sugar and the soda. You're getting all these other things. And so the first thing I'll say is that the whole concept around leucine muscle protein synthesis, I'll be the first to say that mainstream nutrition and fitness tends to overshoot protein requirements to start with. If you look at all the sports scientists, all the dietitians, their protein requirements for people tend to be a lot less than what is in bodybuilding circles. And I know this to be true, having been vegan for 7 years now, that we don't need 1 gram per pound of body weight unless our training volume is really high. Like obviously total calories will come into play here, but if you're just exercising like a normal person, you don't need to be shooting like that, which means that you don't need to be consuming that much total protein, which is actually a good thing because it opens up the door for consuming more whole plant foods. The second thing I'll say is that people think that plant foods are somehow suboptimal because they're more incomplete proteins. So complete proteins are essentially what is recognized as being optimal ratios of different amino acids for the body. Incomplete proteins is just seen as being suboptimal ratios. What I will tell people is that as long as you're eating a relatively diverse range of foods, chickpeas, lentils, nuts, seeds, beans, a little bit of tofu, whatever, anything, you'll get enough amino acids from all of these different foods that pulls together to create these complete proteins that we're looking for. So it's not even an issue in that regard. The other thing that I will say is that, again, this comes back to total protein requirements. We don't need as much total protein, therefore as much leucine to turn on muscle protein synthesis as we need. And so you don't need to be overshooting those targets. And the last thing that I think is really important is ask yourself, what is coming with that? And so with plant proteins, you're getting the leucine, you're getting all these other amino acids, and you are getting vitamins, minerals, and fiber. And all of these things help with gut health, help with hormone precursors, help with driving immune function, help with all of these different systems. Whereas if you just eat a piece of meat that is high in leucine and protein, you might be getting saturated fat, you're getting cholesterol, you're getting all of these types of different things, heterocyclic amines when you cook it. So you're getting all these different types of things that come with it that potentially raise your risk for cancers, drive up IGF-1, which is a cell signaling molecule, which drives muscle growth, but it also drives tumor growth, cancer growth, everything. And so not only are you getting the muscle protein stuff that you think you need, but you're getting all of these other things as well. You can get that with plants minus all of these other things. And so from that perspective, for me, it's a no-brainer. It's just detaching ourselves from that mainstream bodybuilding fitness industry of like, you need tons of leucine and tons of protein to hit your requirements. That's just not the case. That's more bodybuilding fitness myth. It's not supported by proper science. And so I definitely think as long as you're eating a diverse range of foods, and by diverse, it doesn't have to be 50,000 different types of plants. It could just be rotating through chickpeas, lentils, black beans, tempeh, tofu, and then rotating through different types of rice, quinoa, couscous if you wanted to. You don't even have to do that. You could just do potatoes and rice, and then rotating through different colored vegetables because different colored vegetables represent different types of micronutrients. Other thing to remember is that there's protein in rice, there's protein in oats, there's protein in all these different foods. We need to stop just compartmentalizing macronutrients into like, this is a protein food, this is a carbohydrate food. We need to start looking at it from a perspective of this is a food that helps with optimal health across the board. So, serving to optimize our systems across the board. So yeah.
A body composition just becomes a byproduct because of optimized health. So,
Exactly.
I came from that background as well. And what I found beyond the benefits of body composition, recovery. What I found was also my mental clarity and cognition has improved significantly. So with that in mind, how does poor gut health impair cognitive function?
You're typically going to be seeing downstream inflammation everywhere. It's kind of like that canary in the coal mine. So for example, for a lot of men, if they notice that they're getting erectile dysfunction, that's typically a sign that they're probably getting restricted blood flow to all areas of the body. And that's the least of their concerns if they're getting erectile dysfunction, because it could lead to a heart attack or a stroke or something like that. It's the same concept with gut health. So if you're getting this canary in the coal mine, this downstream effect of bloating or some type of gut dysbiosis, IBS, constipation, diarrhea, it's usually an indicator to you that you're probably not performing optimally with your brain function and just with your health in general, which is actually a good thing, because even so, if you're feeling pretty lousy, it makes you realize that if you can figure the gut issues out, your potential for improving your overall mental space and cognitive ability can go up exponentially. And that's exciting, because you live a more full life, you have more mental clarity, you remember people's names better, when you have conversations with people, you bring better energy, you fill up their cup more because you have more to give. I mean, that's really, to me, like what living a good life is about. And then obviously byproducts of that is optimal body composition, because you're not reaching for emotional crutches and food and all these things more because you're not feeling good, and that's affecting your body composition. So there's all these things that come into play. And so what I would say is that when your digestive system is not optimal, your body's just not going to be absorbing nutrients like it could. It's not going to be absorbing different amino acids, different vitamins and minerals that will act and drive as these precursors for hormone production, for neurotransmitter production, for all of these different chemical responses in the body that actually facilitate these states that we're trying to look for. And so if we're decreasing our potential absorption rates and we're decreasing how our body can use nutrition, we're not going to reap the benefits of that. And so it's kind of like putting a really high quality fuel into your vehicle. But if your vehicle doesn't have the right engine or capacity to use that fuel, it's going to be of no use. And so it's really about fine tuning that engine, upgrading that engine so we can then use that fuel to actually get the output that we're looking for. And the beauty of it is that it starts with the gut. And it's for a lot of people, this is a really big challenge. One of the things as a nutritionist and as a transformation coach, the biggest barriers for a lot of people was their gut. The biggest barriers for a lot of people becoming vegan is their gut. If they eat too many plant foods, they get bloated. They feel horrible. If they are constantly trying to do it and they're feeling bloated and horrible, their motivation to work out goes down dramatically. Their inclination to eat poorly increases because they're losing their motivation. And so it's really important to address the gut as the gateway for all of these things. But I definitely think for myself, when I look back at my own mental health, because I came from a place where I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, severe social anxiety, ADHD in my teens. I was heavily medicated for over 10 years. I drank alcohol, I smoked, I had a standard American, just a processed diet. I broke out in pimples all the time. I recognize now that so much of my cognitive state and the mental issues that I was facing originated from the fuel that I was putting into my body. Yes, there was other factors involved, environment, all these different types of things. It's a very multifaceted concept. But I do definitely think that the foods I was putting in was driving these negative feedback responses. Think of your body like a computer and food like a either a virus that infects that computer or an operating system update. So if there's bugs in the operating system and you put good, whole, nutrient-dense foods into your computer, you get an operating system updates that irons out all those bugs, and your computer works more effectively. It doesn't operate as slow. There's less glitches. There's less apps crashing and all these types of things. Whereas if you put processed foods, junk foods, these types of foods into your body more, it's essentially like getting a virus on your computer. Apps start to crash. Things start to go slower. Things start to stall. It locks up. Our body's very similar. It just works in a way of lethargy, brain fog, poor mood, skin pimples, acne, skin breakouts, bloating, and all these digestive responses. And so if we can optimize that, the beauty is that it then starts to fix all these different things here. Very often we think, oh my goodness, I have like all these different things that I need to address in my life. I don't even know where to begin. Often it begins there. And as a downstream effect, it improves all of these different areas. And that's the beauty of it, Luke, is that it doesn't have to be complicated, but it just has to be this focus here.
Sure. So moving on, if we want to optimize gut function, can fasting actually help?
Yeah, and so what I would tell people is think of consuming food like if you rub your arm, right? And you just keep rubbing your arm and rubbing your arm and rubbing your arm, eventually it's going to turn into a bit of a rash, and then you probably start rubbing layers of skin off. And then it's going to have lymphatic fluid and it's going to get very sort of septic looking. Think of putting food through your digestion constantly, all the time, is that skin rubbing. So that food is essentially rubbing your gut lining. It's constantly coming through. It's constantly coming through. It's like traffic on an interstate. You think if you have heavy traffic coming through that interstate constantly, is that road going to start to break down? Is it going to need more maintenance? And so from that perspective, what I'm trying to say here is that giving your digestive system a chance to get those road workers out there and repair those potholes in the highway, and to back off with the rubbing, to let your body's natural processes take hold and for it to scab over and for it to heal. Fasting is like that. It's like a regenerative process. Not only that, but what I found is that it can help with insulin sensitivity. So insulin sensitivity essentially is really what drives, in my mind, a lot of your cognitive ability. So mental clarity, that prevention of that up and down mental roller coaster of like energy dips, spikes, that comes with insulin sensitivity and blood glucose control. Fasting can massively help with that. It's also been shown to help with all types of hormone precursors, growth hormone, testosterone elevation. And one of the other things that I've found is that I do think there's a power in not just constantly paying attention to that craving signal that we're getting. If you can cultivate discipline there, you can start to break those habitual tendencies that those anticipatory insulin releases that our body is creating, thinking it's going to be eating from breakfast from dusk till dawn. Beyond that, man, I honestly think that from a fasting perspective, it can be so beneficial in terms of reducing decision making and just having more time to focus. I find for me, I fast all the way through the morning. I train in a fasted state in the morning as well. I have much more mental clarity. I have much more energy with that because I'm not inducing this insulin and blood sugar response that goes up and down. The less of those peaks and troughs you can get, the more stable your energy is going to look. And then obviously with that is going to come better brain chemistry and all these types of things. And from an immune perspective, I think that if your digestive system is constantly doing work, because think about it like this, your body has a finite amount of metabolic capacity. By metabolic capacity, I mean that it can't be running all functions at the same time and you expect it to run optimally. And so if you're sick, you look at animals when they get sick, they typically don't eat. That's it's almost like it's a visceral reaction. When an animal is sick, it doesn't eat. And that is because we want to remove metabolic activity and energy from your digestion and allocate it towards processes, towards immune function, healing, cell regeneration over here. And so if you're allocating all that blood volume, all that oxygen, all that energy to like breaking down food, you're going to be losing it in these other places. And so I think that from that perspective, knowing that it gives you a chance to regenerate and you can allocate energy in these different places, and then you can go back and you'll eat and you'll allocate energy there later on. Partition that energy strategically, and you'll massively optimize how you respond.
So on the flip side, when should a person not consider fasting?
So I would typically say for most people, the only time that fasting wouldn't be ideal is if they have an eating disorder that they know is a real issue, and the rebound effect of them trying to be restrictive is creating more of an adverse response when they do eat. That's really the only time that I would say. And it depends on the duration of the fast. If we're just talking about a daily fast for 16 hours, I think that's fine for most people. If we're talking about extended fasting, obviously then you need to look at male or female sex hormone production, and just it's a very nuanced thing that you definitely would want support with extended fasting. Like I'm talking like 2, 3, 4, 5 days or more. You definitely want a better strategy with that. But for the average person just looking to fast for 16 hours, I would say the only prerequisite that you need to be aware of is that if you are trying to fast and you're getting through, but then you're binge eating and you're splurging because it's like this rebound effect, it's probably not something you want to do right away. You probably want to dig in and really work on your emotional relationship with food and with yourself and with your life, and figure out those things so you're not having that massive polarity. But beyond that, I think fasting can be a really useful tool for most people. You can still, even if you are a hard gainer or you want to build muscle, you can still have some type of fasting. Anytime, I've been fasting for years, even when I've been in periods of time where I've been trying to put on weight or build muscle, I was still fasting. I was just compressing more calories into my feeding window. Now, if you can handle that and you get a positive, or you don't get a negative biofeedback response, for example, part of what will drive the decision around that is, can you get enough calories in your feeding window? Because some people, if their digestion is slow, or they get, when they're consuming these larger meals in their compressed feeding window and they get a lot of bloating, or they feel excessively full and distended, that's not a good biofeedback cue that you want. But if you don't get that, that can be a sign that, hey, this is a suitable thing for you to pursue. So I definitely think it's around addressing those biofeedback cues. And one thing I will say is that early on, if you've been consuming meals all the time and you feel lightheaded or weak, it can sometimes just be your blood sugars going up and down a bit, and it takes time for that to normalize. It's not just going to miraculously optimize straight away. And so it's almost like you need to go through a period of discomfort before you get out the other side and feel more optimal. And it's the same with, I think, most things. It's the same with learning how to work out properly. It's the same with transitioning to a plant-based diet. Sometimes you will feel potentially a little bit more adverse before you feel better and really dial in the biofeedback. So I definitely think fasting for many people can be a really useful tool in terms of improving their immune function, improving their cognition, improving their body composition long-term, improving their longevity, all kinds of stuff.
Love it. That's why I'm actually doing it as well. I have been doing it for many years now. Body composition, mental clarity, and I've learned, like you, to train on a fasted state. So I want to kind of dive into, peak performance as well, because I feel like I'm at 42, I'm performing better than I was at 22. So peak performance is a word that's thrown around loosely in the fitness community when you see a shredded guy. What does peak performance actually mean to you?
One of the things you touched on, I think, is really important to address straight away, is that I want everyone to know that optimal, or like being lean and having a lot of muscle mass, is not conducive with peak performance. You can be aesthetically in very good shape and be really unhealthy and have no peak performance whatsoever. What I mean by peak performance is essentially just being your best self across the board, not just with how you look. And so what is your energy levels like through the day? How is your sleep quality? How is your mood? How is your mental clarity? How's your creativity? How is your memory? Are you getting sick often? how are all of these different things that come together to essentially create your identity, to create you as a person? Because all of these different things will dictate who you are. Like if you ever met someone and they just bring so much good energy to the room, and you leave that conversation and you're like, man, I feel better. Like I feel like I got energy from them. They gave me some intangible exchange, and I didn't even have to eat anything to get the energy. It was like literally this invisible connection. That is, to me, peak performance. And I often find that those people tend to just have optimized body compositions anyway, because they don't need to eat. Well, put it this way: in order to get to that state, very often you can't be eating a lot of junk food and processed foods. And if you are really overweight, you're not going to have that energy and those optimized chemicals in the body that fuel that state long term. And so all of these things come together as a byproduct of that. So peak performance is essentially the byproducts of optimizing biofeedback. And so if you listen to your body's language and you understand what it's trying to tell you, and you optimize your nuanced biofeedback to then achieve peak performance with energy levels, sleep, cognition, digestive function, immune function, all these different things, your cravings go down, your energy goes up, all these things improve, your ability to train harder, your ability to recover quicker from your workouts. All of these things drive better fat loss. They drive better muscle building. They drive better mental clarity. You get more stuff done in less time, which honestly, that to me is fulfilling in and of itself. Knowing that, okay, I can go in for 2 or 3 hours and I can turbocharge and blast out a whole day's worth of work because my mind is so channeled. Isn't that what life's about, man? Like working less to live more. And so with that comes better ability to be a parent, better ability to be a spouse, better ability to be anything that you value, because you're in alignment with exactly who you want to become. And as a byproduct of that, your body composition optimizes. You look better because of it. And so that to me is peak performance. And one of the biggest, I think, shams of the fitness industry is that you see these transformations of people, but they felt terrible. Terrible. Their cravings were through the roof. They were consuming tons of diet supplements, artificially sweetened drinks, all kinds of processed foods, massive calorie restriction, massive overtraining, tons of cardio, really unsustainable. The energy levels were terrible and they couldn't sustain it. And it makes them feel worse. They come out the back end of that and they rebound and they feel like a failure. And they feel like they failed themselves, when in actuality, they just didn't have a good strategy to start with. It wasn't their fault. They just took a strategy from someone that wasn't ideal for them. And so peak performance, man, it addresses the body composition as a byproduct of addressing the biofeedback stuff. And to me, as a father, as an entrepreneur, as a vegan nutritionist, these things are more important than just having abs. And I know that you can attest to that as well.
100%. Abs is just is like the bonus. It's just a free gift that you get.
Yeah.
So I'm with you as well, being an entrepreneur, being a dad. And this is really a question for me as well, because I wake up at 4:30 a.m. and for me, I want to do as much as I can in the shortest amount of time. It's about optimizing all my every single hour. So where sleep is concerned, is there any way that someone can improve quality of sleep while not having the 6 to 8 hours? Because some people work shifts, some people work late, and ideally you want to have an 8-hour night, but sometimes it's just not possible. So is there any strategies that you can share to help people?
That's a really good question, because one of the things I found, having a young daughter, is that sleep is not always as optimal as it should be in terms of duration. So how do you optimize the depth of it? How do you optimize the quality of it? Because one of the things that I think really gets a light shone on it, especially with my students, is that they say to me, "Oh, my sleep's not bad." And then I'll get them to use a sleep tracker, like an Oura ring that I use. And they recognize how many times they're waking up, or how many times they're not even in deep sleep or REM sleep. And so they might be in bed for 8 hours, but they're getting 4 hours of sleep. And then that's why they're feeling exhausted. And so for me, optimizing everything. So one of the things that I've talked about across the board when it comes to nutrition, training, anything is minimum effective dose. So what is the minimum effective dose you can use for the maximum response possible? And obviously, like you were saying, there's going to be at a point where you can't go too minimum because it's not going to become an effective dose anymore. So what is the most effective dose based on the least amount of stuff? And that can be applied to training, like training volume. But when it comes to nutrition, or when it comes to sleep, I should say one of the things, or some of the things that I found that are really important is what you do the night before sleep. So like your pre-bed rituals. So I'm just going to rattle off some things for you because there are a lot of different things out there, and it's worth dabbling and trying in different things to see what works for you. And so one of the first things that we do, or that I do personally, is I stop eating so close to bed. I find that for myself, I've noticed that if I eat too close to bed, my digestive function's still too active and it keeps my core temperature elevated. And if your body temperature is too high, you'll either sweat in the bed, or part of that is your body temperature has to come down for deeper optimal sleep. If your core temperature is too elevated, it's going to prevent that from happening. And very often, if you're eating right before bed, that can prevent that body temperature dropping enough to get into that deep sleep that you want. So what I suggest is stop eating like 3 hours before bed. That, I know for some people that's challenging. That's not always going to be the case. If you get home from work late and you have to eat, there's different scenarios for that. But I'm just saying, if you can, do that. Another thing would be to stop consuming liquids about 2 hours before bed. A lot of people talk about, you need to stay hydrated all day. But if you're drinking 30 minutes before bed, big old cups of tea and stuff, you are going to be getting up for the bathroom a lot. You want to try and reduce that and then super hydrate in the morning. I'd rather run a little bit dehydrated in the evening, prevent that bathroom break from constantly waking me up, and then super hydrate first thing in the morning, and then allow that hydration to fuel me through the day. Other things are going to be using blue blocking filters on your phone, your computer. Typically, most phones now come with built-in blue light filters. I use an app on my computer called Flux. You need to reduce blue light emission or even screen time for the last hour that you're awake, because that screen time will suppress melatonin production, which massively will affect how you get into deep sleep. Another thing is getting some type of sun exposure, ideally earlier in the morning before lunch, because that serotonin production from getting that exposure then will create a precursor effect of melatonin production later in the day. And so there's different neurotransmitters and different hormones that work in tandem. And if you get one, it fuels another. And so it's really important to do that every morning, even in the morning before lunch or any time of day if you have to. The other things I would say is blood sugar stability. I've come back to this a lot. So if you're eating a lot of processed foods, ice cream, sugary foods in the evening, that will really create an unstable blood sugar environment and will keep your core temperature elevated. That's going to affect the quality of your sleep as well. And then there are other things like dropping the temperature down in your house a lot, getting it cooler, blackout curtains, removing any type of light, even small light in your room. I think all those things help. But coming back to nutrition, I honestly think that if you can move to the cleanest whole food plant-based diet possible with lots of plant diversity, you're going to set up your body to create the right chemical responses. Because remember what I was saying earlier about your body being like a computer, and you're putting in like viruses or an operating system update. If you put in operating system updates, you create the right precursors, the right environment for your body to actually get into deeper sleep. So you're not just laying in bed for 8 hours, but sleeping for 4. You might be laying in bed for 5 or 6 hours, but you're sleeping for 5 hours in a deep or REM state of sleep. And so I definitely think that you need to look at all of these things as a whole. Sleep for a lot of people is multifaceted. It comes down to nutrition training, even training in the evening. I think for a lot of people will affect that, because you're going to produce an adrenaline response from your workout that can really affect your sleep depth. So that's why I encourage people, if they can, to train in the morning or at lunchtime at the latest, so you're not having that adrenaline response keeping you awake in the evening. But it comes down to setting up your room, like I was saying, blue light, setting up your meal timing, setting up your intake of liquids, setting up your room temperature, but also making good, better, smart decisions when it comes to the quality of food. So those are operating system updates for your hardware. It's not a virus that's going to create glitches and bugs and keep you in that low state of sleep. So it is multifaceted, but at the same time, it's not complicated either.
Just to kind of wrap up, you've covered so much today, Fraser, from amino acids to sleep, biofeedback, gut health, optimizing nutrition as well. So the final question is, what is one thing that a person can do to take control of their lives right now and their impact in the world?
So what I would say to them, and what I would say to you, is that simplicity is often the missed secret. You know, like I talked here about, people often want to they have all these different problems, or they want to address all these different things. Often it comes from doing a few fundamental things well. And I think that a lot of coaches, I think a lot of people in general, they make it more complicated than it needs to be. One, because most people think that it has to be complicated because most people don't have results that they want. So it must be some secret. It must be complicated. And the other thing I think is that a lot of people within these industries are trying to come up with these gimmicks and interesting things to promote and sell. So they come up with complexity as a way to try and like create curiosity, when in actuality, the processes are quite simple once you understand the body and biofeedback as a whole. And it really comes back to daily movement. If the food has a label or an ingredients label or comes in a package, reduce it as much as you can. It comes back to learning and attaching so many motivations as to why you're doing this. So for me, for example, coming from a place where I used to be a butcher and I had all these mental health problems and I was just really struggling, I recognized that having been a butcher and having been in slaughterhouses and seen that, I wanted to attach values and motivations to all these different reasons why I should make this work. And so it was health, it was the ethical aspect of things, it was the environmental aspect of things, it was teaching our daughter better values, it was setting her up for a better, healthier life. And so I had this deep driver of wanting to lead as a parent, wanting to lead as a coach, of understanding the health benefit and driving the decisions around a whole food plant-based diet, understanding the ethical motivation, which really prevents you from kind of flip-flopping between, because you have a value system that is so deep that you don't want to go back there again. And also understanding from an environmental perspective that having kids and caring about other people, like we want to leave this planet hopefully in a better state than when we came into it. And so we have a responsibility there. And I think simplicity around daily movement, around keeping your diet simple, but attaching a lot of different motivations to why you're doing those things, not just one. Like you can still have just one, but why not have more? It takes nothing away from you to have more understandings and more motivations and drivers to make all of these different things happen. Because one of the things that I will tell you is that if you only see this as just as a diet, that as soon as you get bloating or something adverse happens as a biofeedback response, your ability to want to problem solve and figure things out and understand your biofeedback language diminishes, and you typically will give up easier. Whereas if you have deep drivers and you burn the ships and you're like that Spartan warrior in the hot gates and you're not turning around when the Persian army's coming, like you're going to figure it out, then that makes you resourceful and it allows you to work through your biofeedback patiently, understanding that it's just trying to guide you to your optimal self. And so simplicity, daily movement. If it has a package, leave it out. Attach all these drivers to why you're doing this. And community. The last thing I think is environment and community. If you don't have a good support network with you physically, find people online. surround yourself digitally with a good online community as well as a good support network physically if you can, because your environment really will drive the way you see things. It's like trying to like grow a fruit tree in clay. You can water that fruit tree and you can pour sunlight on it every day, but if it's growing in this nutrient void soil, it's not going to bear fruit. All you need to do sometimes is remove that fruit tree, put it in nutrient dense soil, keep watering it, keep giving it sunlight, and the fruit grows. Your environment's the same. And if you can't get a good physical environment, that's when a good online community, I think, is really, really beneficial as well. So that's how you want to do it.
Love it, Fraser. Well, thank you very much once again. Fourth summit in a row. Always appreciate your energy and all the wisdom that you share.
Thank you, buddy. I appreciate you having me on, and I hope this information was helpful for everyone listening.
We hope you've enjoyed this presentation. A wise man once said, "You make a new life by making new choices." Now, if you know that what you eat matters, if you know that health comes from healthy living, then the time to make new choices is now. And just imagine owning the summit for life. Click the button for more. Maybe you know our stories. Luke and I lost family to cancer, and we wish we would have known sooner what you are learning here today. So please, share the summit, take action, and let's support each other. Thank you. This is Toby and Luke signing off, and we can't wait to see you for the next presentation.